In Japan, any day is an adventure.
It's real important to go over with a real open mind and to just jump in.
Tim and Lori Dorman and their children Rory, Abby, and Zachary lived in Tokyo. Tim was an assistant vice president and personnel manager for the Bank of America's Asia Division. The three children went to an international school. Eric and Lynn Brown moved to Venezuela from Canada. Eric was the contract administrator with Bechtel Power Corporation, building the Caracas Metro. Their boys, Ian and Jason, attended a local Venezuelan school.
I think the children got a lot of benefit out of it. They learned another language. They saw other parts of the world, met other people.
Living overseas changes you. Hopefully you get a lot more maturity. I think there's a lot more maturity. You have a broader understanding about things. You're not as frustrated about things that don't always go well. You tend to be a little bit more relaxed.
And greater appreciation.
John and Margaret Topple lived in Hong Kong, where John was country sales manager for Hewlett-Packard sales office. Margaret went over with a teaching job. Later, she started her own business, importing sports clothes.
It's just a very broadening experience, and it feels good.
It's the opportunity to do something different, something more than merely doing your job.
We try to do everything as we get as German as possible.
Louis and Rinda Burley lived in Germany. Louis was an attorney for the U.S. Air Force General Counsel's office. Their daughter Erica attended a local German school.
It's very strange, but it was nice.
You can have more fun in a 2-year assignment almost anywhere you go than you can even imagine.
We saw things that we would never have had the opportunity to see had we not gone.
Bob and Jan Ricks and their daughters Lisa and Debbie have lived in Indonesia and in Saudi Arabia. Bob works for Bechtel Petroleum Corporation, staffing overseas projects. The family lived in company compounds, and the daughters attended American community schools. The continuing growth of international commerce means that many families are being sent abroad to do business. These families face the challenge of making a home in a foreign environment. They face a new language, a new culture, a new way of life. When we're offered an opportunity to go overseas, to work, to live, we think about the travel brochures. We think about the Balinese dancers and the temples at Borobudur, Westminster Cathedral, and the pyramids in Egypt. We think about all the wonderful things that we've always wanted to do. What we don't think about is that living somewhere is very different from staying in a hotel. If you're a tourist, you are protected from the culture. You're not dealing with the postman, dealing with the shoe repairman, dealing with the butcher. And if your expectations are unrealistic, you're going to be very disappointed, and you will have a very hard time adapting. When you live overseas, hundreds of little things can be very frustrating. Even a simple thing like making a phone call can be complex and confusing. Telephones function very differently around the world. In Japan, in France, in England, in the USA. We become disoriented and uncomfortable when things don't work as we think they should. Sometimes we can't even understand the instructions. We depend on familiar signs and cues to read and function in our environment. But in a new culture, many of the familiar cues are gone. We're confronted with entirely new ways of doing things, of thinking, of valuing, of perceiving the world. This causes anxiety. It is the accumulation of repeated disorientation that precipitates culture shock.
The simplest of items, to get a drink of water, to order a cup of coffee, required an amount of mental energy that was enormous. It was like being in an exam 24 hours a day.
I think you're going to experience culture shock regardless of where you go. We lived in a wonderful city. We lived in Singapore, cosmopolitan city. I mean, it's one of the really fine places in the world to live. But there's still a culture shock.
The whole term culture shock is something that a lot of us who are working in this area decry because it sounds so mechanistic. It sounds like something you catch and then you get over. And we don't see it that way. I prefer to call it a cycle of readjustment because when we look at the way people respond typically in new situations, it's just like any other change. If a baby is born into a family, or if someone dies in a family, or you get a new job, or you move within the confines of the United States, you will typically go through the same cycle of readjustment. In the beginning, people go through a busy, almost euphoric period that may last a month or so. And we're fond of calling that a tourist phase because it's when people take most of their pictures. They're excited and interested about the new adventure, and the things that are troublesome have not yet begun to really intrude into their lives.
When we would get into terminal phase 2, very often John would come home from work and start out with, let's pack the bags. We're getting out of here. I've had it. You know, we got to get out of here before we don't make it out of here.
That was it. That was the end. These people understand me. They know exactly what I'm talking
They're trying
about.
to drive me crazy.
But they're doing this on purpose, just to me.
Stereotyping the people in the culture. If they were only different, I would be fine. Placing the cause of failure outside oneself.
You are bickering with each other, of course. Small things become major annoyances. Children got barked at more than usual and barked back more than usual.
Well, mostly for me, it manifested myself in my driving. I was a very aggressive driver. People would step in front of me in a crosswalk and I'd aim for them. But culture shock is not just a problem of the family. It certainly affected my performance. I know it affected my performance. You get a little depressed, you get a little aggressive, you maybe react wrong.
Women don't come out of their homes sometimes. They'll stay in their houses, not open their blinds. You'll invite them to do things and they won't participate. You know, they won't, they'll sleep a lot. You know, the same kind of things really that people would do here if they were having problems.
Phase 3 of culture shock is the stage at which point you've kind of reached the bottom and you're quite depressed or alienated, or you really judge that nothing is working out your way, so there's got to be some change. And you start feeling a need to adapt to the way things are done here.
And the beginning of the pulling up period is, or the adjustment phase, I suppose you could call it, is characterized by small steps. And I guess the people who get through that the best are the ones who are used to paying attention to those little signals.
You learn to know when to take a taxi and when to drive, when you could park and when you couldn't park. It sounds like a silly thing,
You
but
also learned how to flow with the traffic. There are a lot of people on the streets. The person living overseas would just flow right along, very smooth about it. And the tourist would be stopping people, getting bumped and jostled.
If you go overseas quite a bit, you become more philosophical. That, you know, other people are different. You have to accept that, and there's not much you can do about it.
You have to learn to live with it. If you don't, it'll destroy you. You really have to learn to accept it. Hey, it's not your country. It's theirs.
You have to say, well, sure, the opera isn't here. You're not going to hear a concert. You don't have television and Saturday night hockey. But it's not the end of the world. There's sometimes you might miss it, but you'll make up for it when you go out on a holiday and you appreciate it.
we would always spot the tourists who came. And we were the natives then, all of a sudden, and tourists would be asking us questions, and it felt very good to be knowledgeable about what was going on, about what you were eating, about all these other kinds of things. And that was a very nice feeling. And so you learn to be an expert, a local expert for all the visitors who came by.
I found for a man working in Hong Kong, he may have greater frustrations or lesser frustrations because of the cultural differences, but he's going to work and coming home. For a woman, the frustrations are very different.
I think that in Arabia, if you didn't have children, you may find it difficult to fill your time. If I went back there and I didn't have children, I would want to find some kind of work, maybe teaching school or doing something like that.
Ooh, are they flying fish or are they just jumping fish?
It's very hard for women who are accompanying their husbands overseas to work. There are people who work out of their homes. There are a lot of people who teach English.
I would recommend that other women work overseas or become involved immediately in an American club, international club, expatriate organization, babysitting, anything. Become involved with other people. Force themselves to become involved with other people.
In going overseas and adapting, the wife is the leader. The wife is the one who sets the tone.
People that we knew who had a spouse who was unhappy, just it made life miserable for everybody. They didn't know how to cope with it. Their wife didn't know how to cope with it. If you can imagine, all day long you'd be involved in difficult, unfamiliar circumstances, and then to go home and have someone be totally unhappy and to simply talk about that aspect of it all the time, it would be a real strain.
Doesn't matter how good the job is, how good the financial remuneration will be. If the woman does not want to leave her community back home, her family back home, they should not go. And there's no way that you're going to talk somebody into it and make it be successful. You have to want to go 110% or it's not going to work.
The greatest number of early returns are due to the fact that the wife can't adapt. And the employee will return home because he says, I can get another job. I can't get another wife.
Many women go because their husbands take a job overseas, and they feel forced to go, and they go, you know, really sort of unwillingly. And there's not much you can do about that, except that try to be as open as you can, because there are really a lot of good experiences that you can have, and there will be bad experiences, and if you can concentrate on the good things that happen to you, or try to think of the good things that you can accomplish, or the places you might be able to visit, then it's much better for you. It works better for your family in general.
Spend your initial time and getting settled and making that your highest priority to get your family established, because if that's not done at the outset, you simply haven't laid the sufficient groundwork for successful adaptation.
For us, the most important thing in our attitude going over, and something that we preserved the whole time we were there, was our family and doing things that our children would remember. So we planned outings weekly.
That's me.
Look at these little kids dragging that thing.
I was so heavy.
Abby, you were 4 years old.
All I did was pull a rope.
That was right out by our house. There's our steps.
Yeah.
Look how little you are, Abby.
I still remember that day.
You do?
Yeah.
What do you remember?
Only friend.
There's Abby's friend.
This is the neighborhood float right here.
Remember this, girls?
Yep.
They'd carry the shrine, and they'd chant that whole time.
It's interesting to think that ages 3 and 5, which our kids were when they went over, developmentally, it's just the ideal age to be there. And the impact that Japan and the exposure to the 50-odd nationalities they had in their international school was significantly greater than any psychological or developmental impact that Japan had on us.
Kids are great. They were terrific. They jumped in. If they wanted to moan and groan, that was fine. They could do that for 3 months, and they were usually all right. The key factor was the mother. If the mother was happy and contented and supportive of the kids, then everything was fine. If the mother was going to sit at home and whine and cry and bang her head against the wall, and the kids very often would pick up on that, and then it would just become a nightmare.
Everybody in a family unit, a group, moving together, is going to experience this move differently, and everybody should be involved.
When I first heard that we were going to Germany, well, I was pretty excited because it was going to be a different sort of thing. It was going to be new, but I was also sort of sad because we were leaving behind everything that I had been with for most of my life.
At first scary, because I wouldn't know anyone, and I would have to go out there and meet everyone that spoke a different language. I would have to learn the language and get to know the people knowing their language. I couldn't go up to them and start speaking in English.
Yeah, I had no idea what to expect when I first went overseas. None at all. I always thought it would be like the TV shows, but it wasn't.
I expected to see people riding in wagons on dirt roads and as a surprise to come in and see the same sort of thing you'd see in America.
Everything was different there. The people, the teachers, the food. It was like coming to a whole new world.
Schooling, of course, is a great concern to parents before they go, and there are usually local schools and, in many communities, American or international schools.
Tokyo is a place where there are incredible schooling choices, all of them fantastic. But which school are you going to send your child to? An American school, an international school, a girls' school, a boys' school, a Japanese-American school, or for your young children, purely Japanese?
There are usually ways that you can find out about the curriculum, and it's a good idea to have a list of questions that you can put together and then find out through your network of acquaintances who you should communicate to get those questions answered before you make the decision.
One of the concerns also that comes about it is medical care. And I had a Chinese doctor and had a baby overseas. And I was very fortunate. It worked out very well. I don't think I could have had better care anywhere in the world.
There are multiple support networks for people that they can seek out, but you do have to seek them out. But there are schools, churches, social organizations, clubs.
The support group that you get from your own company is one of the most important things of living overseas.
Ours was a big company and many expatriates, and the women were extremely supportive. We moved into the hotel, and within the first week, I had, 10 phone calls, luncheons planned, people to take me to see schools, to take me to look at apartments.
There's a community environment in the expat community about people taking on someone new. It's much easier to make friends much more quickly. People are willing to accept you as a friend, and it becomes a more solid friendship, and they're willing to share their experiences with you and tell you shouldn't do this or you should do this, or here's a good place to go to buy this, or a good place, don't go to this place.
The most important thing I found was reaching out to other people. Going next door, going downstairs, getting on the phone and saying, I've had it, I need to talk to somebody, I'm going to jump out the window, you won't believe it. And having somebody else say, I know exactly how you feel.
I would say it would be very important to keep a journal, develop a project, write a book, draw, go out in the community and do something, but not to stay at home. I think it could become overwhelming because you're so isolated from what you know is real.
There are a number of things you can get involved in being an expatriate wife, and I got involved in the dragon boat races, an annual festival. They get in a small dragon boats, put a dragon head on the front and everything, and they race, which is really a grueling experience. And we lost, but we had probably more fun than anybody else did. We got involved in a gourmet club, and that was an opportunity to get involved in people of different nationalities in an expatriate situation.
Every town has its own festival, and many of them take place in the harvest season. And you have wine fests, and you have beer fests, and you have all kinds of, any good excuse to get together and have a party.
We went camping a great deal right from the beginning and traveled a great deal around the countryside. Joined the Audubon Society, and that opened up many organized camping trips, and meeting other people through that type of thing opened up our social life.
It was a great opportunity to go to other places, and I would highly recommend that for people. You can always come back to the States, but you can't always go to the Seychelles Islands or to Greece or to Egypt. You can't always go to those places. So it's really important to do that.
Many people save their money while they're overseas and don't go on as many trips as we did. But you can really still put a lot of money away and take smaller trips. There's a lot of trips that are near where you live. You can always see a lot of things.
What they save, they end up, when they come back to the United States, spending in psychiatric treatment because they've driven themselves crazy trying to save all their money.
The market was a real challenge for me because the food was so different, and you could do bargaining. That was a whole new thing we'd never done in America. It was really fun for me, and it was fun for my children. And people in other cultures like it when you try to do things their way. It's their country.
The traits, skills, characteristics of functioning in another culture clearly can be acquired. First of all, it starts with intellectual and emotional curiosity. It goes from that
to really just learning, to drinking in knowledge, to really being curious about differences.
There are probably some characteristics that really help to get started in the country. Flexibility being the big one, and that's something that enters most of our ability, I think, to go into new situations and succeed. A sense of humor, I think, is crucial. You are going to be in situations where you feel foolish, maybe you look foolish, and if you can just stand back for a minute and take a look at it and enjoy the silliness of it, you're way ahead.
We would laugh every single night over what was traumatic during the day.
You just have to learn to smile and go with it, because you're not going to change them. It's just going to be that way.
The ability to communicate clearly. I'm not talking about the new language, but just within yourself, to know what it is that's going on and be able to say those things, to articulate them to another human being. And the ability to establish relationships with other people.
I think people who really had a lot of trouble living overseas were people that had problems before they came. They may have been having marital problems or family conflict, and they thought that moving overseas would help them and that then they would be fine. And that's not the case at all. You really have to start out with a stable family situation for the most part when you go overseas.
In deciding to go overseas, the family should think, is this really for us? Is this assignment going to be right for us?
Take a look at what the cultural demands, the cultural frustrations, the cultural challenges are in the particular country that you're going to, and the extent to which you feel as a family you are equipped to deal with those.
Can I tolerate ambiguity? Can I tolerate anxiety? Can I tolerate things that I don't know? We, many times, have to adjust ourselves to the environment rather than the other way around. And that really is one of the building blocks to going into an overseas assignment.
Learn the culture, and I mean not just the daily way of living and shopping and working, but how people do business together. And one of the best ways to do this is to ask other people who've been and return and learn from their mistakes, because you can learn a great deal from someone who's been there before you.
I think you should have a very good knowledge of what the culture is that you're going to. If there are rules that, are things that you shouldn't do in that culture, it's nice if you can know those things before. The Arabs consider it offensive if you show your arm from your shoulder down to about here. So the dress should have a sleeve about this length. And they don't like you to show your leg or really any shape. So the dresses that, this is a very appropriate dress. And it would have been very helpful to me to have taken some long dresses when I went to Saudi Arabia.
When preparing to go overseas, don't take anything that you would be very unhappy about coming back without. Don't take the antique family Bible.
There are all kinds of things that you have that you can live without. And it's a great chance to live without them, to leave them, and start new.
Bring a few personal things, a few pictures for the walls and a few things that you like to see around.
Take things that mean a lot to you as a family. Photo albums.
One small box was given to each person that was their private treasure chest, and they could take whatever ridiculous thing they wanted. If they wanted pebbles from the garden, if they wanted particular toys. They took their most favorite items. And it was the touch of home that was needed when people were uncomfortable.
Know what your most important things are, since it is different for everybody. What is it that you really need? In preparing, you have to think of many aspects. I think I'd want to spend a little bit of time reading something about the culture in a way that would interest me. Find a children's book in the culture, because that's a good way to get at the values. We read Paul Bunyan in the United States. What do they read? What do they teach their children that's important? So I might want to spend a little bit of time learning about the values there. And it's also a very useful way to put things into context.
I would get a book and I would learn 50 words of the language. Even if I couldn't pronounce them well, I would learn those words. They would be please, thank you, good morning, the pleasantries, the socialization, so people would know I was trying.
¿Dónde está el correo? Muchas gracias.
¿Cuánto cuesta esto?
¿Cuánto cuesta esto?
¿Puede darme dos, por favor?
I had read in a book somewhere about someone learning a language by pasting signs on the wall, so we sat down and I wrote out the name for everything in the room. We put the word for wall on the wall and di lampo on the lamp and the word for couch for bookshelf.
Setting the table that night, the word for the fork was wrapped around the fork, and the middle of your plate was plate, but it really forced us to learn all the words of having to do with the house.
If you're going to go to a country, learn the language. That's all there is to it. And if you've got children, make sure they learn it because they'll pick it up much faster than you ever will. And it doesn't matter if it's perfect or not perfect. You must make the effort and you must overcome your inhibitions in speaking it.
If you are a thinking person, there's no reason to be unprepared. If you do a little bit of research ahead of time, there are resources who will help you find the schools, the shops, the doctors, all the things that you need to meet your basic needs. I can't stress enough, do your research, do your homework before you go. And then once you get to the country, you will find more resources.
Get as much background as you can, get it as broadly as you can, and then just go there. You just have to go there. Jump into it.
We would go overseas tomorrow. Absolutely a fabulous family experience for all of us.
I absolutely would do it again. First chance I get.
Absolutely. I'd love to go back overseas.
I'd like to go to Netherlands or Iceland, places like that.
Yes, I would like to do it again.
Tomorrow.
Yeah,
Or maybe this afternoon.
Your attitude has a lot to do with your experiences abroad. Let me give you an example. If you put a mouse and some cheese in a maze, the mouse would quickly learn where the cheese is. If you move the cheese, the mouse will search all over again until it finds the cheese in the new place. If you were to put a man in a maze, he too would learn quickly where to find the cheese. But when you move the cheese, what will the man do? He'll devise a list of reasons for why the cheese is no longer there. When you go overseas, you can have a fantastic time. You can have the cheese, or you can have a terrible time and have lots of reasons why it went bad. The choice is up to you.